In this presentation, as well as in the next one, I want to draw on insights that I obtained in a book called The Rediscovery of Apocalyptic, written by the German scholar Klaus Koch. This first set of slides deals with apocalyptic literature as a literary genre. Koch says that the study of apocalyptic, of course, had to take into account first the linguistic world in which it emerged, at least for those set of texts that we have that were written in Hebrew and Aramaic. So we have the book of Daniel, First Enoch, Second Baruch, for Ezra, the Apocalypse of Abraham, and the book of Revelation. In the broader world and that discloses the book of Revelation is very influenced by the Hebrew Bible and really belongs to the domain of the Semitic world. From the standpoint of genre, you may have seen that genre is referred to in the introductions to the Hebrew Bible as form criticism. There are some definite features of apocalyptic texts. Let's mention a few of them. So, for instance, we have dialogue cycles that oftentimes are several chapters long. In several of these books, we have visions or dialogues in which a seer talks with a heavenly counterpart about a reality that is previously unknown. The precursor, of course, for this is in the prophetic material in the Hebrew Bible, where the prophet talks with God, right? We have examples here of, examples could be multiplied, but the phrase, the Lord spoke to me, or thus says the Lord, suggests that the prophet has been in the divine council and has heard directly from God. In the aftermath of the exile, we don't have the seer accessing God directly, but rather what we have is a dialogue between the seer and an angel, such as we see in the book of Amos, chapter 7, verse 1, the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verse 1. I do encourage you to consult those readings as we go so that you can see for yourselves what we are talking about. The features of these changes run like this. There is the keyword see, the seer sees. There is oftentimes an imperative or an exclamation, lo or behold. There is a participle used both in Hebrew as well as in Greek, pointing to the supernatural state of affairs. And then there is a change into movement as the revelation then becomes either divine discourse, or the seer then is led to a problem, to witnessing a problem that is tormenting him and tormenting his audience. Let me quote from Koch. He says, if the discourse cycle does not begin with divine visionary disclosure, then attention is first drawn to a tormenting problem which harasses the seer and even produces a bodily change in him. John, who was banished, quote, on account of the word of the Lord, close quote, found himself, quote, in the spirit of on the Lord's day, close quote, Revelation 1:10. Similarly, the introduction to 4 Ezra says that because of the destruction of Zion, Ezra's spirit was, quote, stirred profoundly. It is, of course, the case then that given these experiences that the seer is having, the seer experiences fear and dismay. And Koch questions whether these experiences are real or simply they are part of the literary stock. In other words, they go to literary forms that were expected of these the seers and of this type of literature. The seer, then, another aspect, literary aspect of the apocalyptic literature, the seer draws conclusions for his audience from his experience. And these conclusions often have the form of paranetic discourses. Paranetic simply means uh, kind of a sermon with advice. And Koch suggests then that what we have here is an eschatological ethic. Namely, the seer encourages endurance in the midst or under persecution because the seer is convinced that the end is at hand. So we have here a series of examples as in the letters of the book of Revelation, the final discourse and the letter in 2nd Baruch, for Ezra 14:27 to 36, and the paranetic book in 1st Enoch. In Daniel and in the Apocalypse of Abraham, the paranetic discourses are substituted by legends, by stories that showcase the exemplary behavior which are to be emulated. You may remember in the book of Daniel how he and his companions actually are chosen to be servants in the Babylonian civil structure, and as they are prepared for service, they refuse to eat the meals provided to them by the core, instead preferring a different diet that consists of vegetables and water. And after a number of days, they are found to be in better shape than those that had eaten the rations provided by the monarch, by the king. So that what that is suggesting then is the behavior that Jews are to follow in order to subsist or to exist, to survive in an alien and very often hostile culture to them. Another aspect here we have is that of pseudonymity. Very often the apocalyptic books use the names of famous people from the past. So we have books attributed to Enoch, Adam, Ezra, Daniel. In the New Testament period, we have an Apocalypse of Peter, an Apocalypse of Paul. So in reality, this is part of the way that this literature was composed, that the names of famous individuals were used. Book of Revelation appears to be an exception, as the seer most likely is named John, although this is not the same John as the writer of the Gospel or the writer of those letters that also are attributed to someone named John. However, the apocalyptic books differ from the contemporary wisdom. The wisdom literature, the late one especially, used the names of Solomon and others as a way of perhaps securing readership as well as survival. Wisdom literature used appeal to royal names as literary frame. We don't have that here in the apocalyptic material. Rather, what we have is the use of the names of famous people, but not monarchs, not kings. we have also in the apocalyptic literature images rich in symbolism. The forces of the present age, the olam, in Greek aion, are represented by images of trees or animals. The origin of these, of course, is in the Hebrew Bible that uses simple images. So, for instance, Israel is said to be a vineyard in Isaiah 5. The invading forces from the north are said to be wild beasts in Jeremiah. And the writers of the apocalyptic literature took these images, these literary resource, and grossly exaggerated, even grotesquely exaggerated, so that the images are not easily understood. We have the story in the book of Daniel, how he sees a vision in the night where four monsters, four creatures are emerging from the sea. The last one, the one that I mentioned there in the slide, is a beast that comes out, the last one that comes out with 10 horns, and one of the horns actually is a terrifying horn that displaces three other horns, and basically creates a lot of havoc and a lot of destruction. So that a feature of the apocalyptic literature is that the seer himself is oftentimes a he, does not understand the things that he's seeing, right? So that the visions themselves are cryptic. They are not entirely clear to the seer, of course, much less to us. And Koch then suggests that what we have here then is language that suggests a certain kind of training, a certain mentality that is expected. In other words, there is a repository of images, a repository of language, and a repository of go-to motifs that a number of these books used, and that suggests then a certain motif, a certain mentality, a certain mind for the individuals composing and using this literature. This will become clearer in the next presentation when I talk about the motifs of apocalyptic. Lastly, here I want to mention that what these books actually betray is long literary development. These books, in many cases, were composed over many decades. So these books are not really the authorship of a single hand, but they were written by communities. We find that, for instance, in breaks, in the train of thought, in contradictions, in detail. Book of Daniel is a case in point, using two different languages. Chapters 1 and to 2, 4a, and then chapters 8 to 12 are written in Hebrew, and then chapter 2, 4b to the end of 7 is written Aramaic, clearly demonstrating the composite nature of the book of Daniel. What this suggests then is that the origin of apocalyptic is in the change of the linguistic era in that part of the world from Hebrew and Aramaic to another language. So we are actually looking at a period around 200 BCE for the emergence of this literature. In the next presentation, I will talk about the leading motifs in the apocalyptic literature.